Yeah, good afternoon, good morning. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I just got off another call where they were talking about being authentic, authentic,
Yeah,
and that it was very interesting. There were, I don't know, 6 people, all with very prestigious backgrounds and working with businesses and people worldwide. And one of the participants kept saying, let's be present. Instead of talking about some other time, let's talk about us now. And so he made a couple of forays. I really like your hair and your smile. It was just wonderful to see you this morning. And every other participant went back into, well, what we're doing is, and we're trying to do this and we're trying to do that. And he said, well, how about bringing us present? And yes, we should be we should be I mean, they wouldn't do it. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. The resistance to being present was just pretty amazing.
well, they had work to do.
I'm sorry?
They had work to do.
They have work to do. Yeah.
We get geared up. It's very difficult to get out of that pattern.
Yeah. And yes. Yeah. So did you see the email that I sent? A short while ago.
Well, what do you mean? The one, it was just a message from you?
Yeah, talking about discernment.
Right. I read.
Okay. Okay. All right. I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't think of that as an email. Sorry. So, okay. Now that's a very nice, continuation of Sarah's talk from Wednesday. I thought she was very good.
Yeah.
And I do
Thank you.
apologize for the noise. Generally, there's no interruption. And then somebody came to the door, and then my wife put the news on, and it was just like,
Life happens. Life happens.
I mean, I didn't mind being, my mic being turned off, muted, because that was a good thing. I should have thought of it sooner.
That's it's really hard when we're caught up in the what's happening to remember to do that kind of stuff. So yeah. So I'm wondering, Anita mentioned a time or two ago that she was uncomfortable with recording this, and I have been recording this just because that's the way I set it up. I do that all the time. I have not paid attention to the recordings. They just go get buried. But I would like to be able to share this dialogue if that would be something that you're comfortable with. Okay.
I mean, this work is very important to me. And of course, I see you building on it, as we go along. And I am, I'm doing it in different areas. And there's a lot going on right now. We've got a lot to, it helps to have some consistency, acknowledged and in writing or on video, that shows us how we're developing these thoughts. I totally understand that. I don't mind being recorded.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, the discernment thing has been perking around in my head quite a bit. I am often surprised when it appears to me that people don't seem to be, well, I mean, Trump is such a great example. Some of us saw him as a person not to be trusted, as a bully and those kinds of things. And other people saw him as a person to be trusted and to be followed. So that just brought up for me what we use as criteria for testing the truth of the world. You know, when we see some experience, how do we record it in our minds and in our lives as being trustworthy, capable of acting upon, being included in our own world instead of dismissed from our world? How do we make those choices on a consistent basis? And how do we learn to refine that ability to get better at it, so that the experiences that we have in life are what we expect to have instead of surprises that we don't expect to have? That for me is part of it. I wonder whether those people who have really connected with Trump, for instance, and really feel like he is the path forward for them, what they expect to experience if that really became true, if there really was, if he really did, you know, control their world as he's promised to do. What would they think they are going to experience, and would that happen? And if it wouldn't, then what was?
Yeah. Well, I take a little bit of a different take on that. I mean, I'm assuming that the person has rational thought and a certain sense of centering within the truth of their being.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of guys who love Trump, but, you know, are pickup gun toting, you know, and they truly live in a different world than I do. You know, we can hang out around the pickup truck bed and, you know, and sort of have a meeting of minds. But when we do that, I realize that there's a whole worldview that they have that they're not giving up for Trump or anybody. They just feel that Trump is sort of giving the shaft to the world. So great, I'm all for it because that's the way I feel right now. But a lot of these, you know, and I'm talking about ones who really do have an inner life. I've met a lot too.
Yeah, no, I know wonderful people that are caught in that. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I used to know this framer who was very, very smart. And, you know, he would sometimes tell me some of the things he thought about at night. And it was like, I didn't even know up here in the wilds of North Carolina, I didn't even know we got that kind of news. he was right up on it. You know, yeah, it kind of makes it easy to let go of all preconceptions. But I mean, that's how I would answer this thing about Trump. I think people are more centered. And so discernment comes from that centering, comes from out of that centering. And so a fellow, well, the one I'm thinking of, you know, take him fishing and, you know, he knows exactly what's going on. Well, on framing a house, he's on every, I mean, that's a type of discernment that's presence.
Yes.
That's very, very acute. But bring him here to downtown Atlanta in the midst of some reception or something, he'd be totally at a loss. You know, it doesn't compute. I mean, he wouldn't want to be there. I don't want to be there sometimes, you know. But so, I mean, I think you're very right in saying that discernment is very much connected to worldview. I mean, and what one's centered in, the worldview that one is centered in. And I am going to do notes, you know, just very quick notes so that I can put something together. I said I would do that.
I think that's just a wonderful thing. that's maybe part of the longing that we have when we see people who seem to be discerning things in such a different way than we do, is to explore what the worldview is,
Yeah.
to get a better, deeper understanding of why one feels that way. I know there's been for me a realization that there's a certain amount of truth, or pieces of truth, in the dissatisfaction people have with, the government, the elite, those kinds of things, that's actually appropriate and is right, but it gets colored in a way that makes it hard to actually respond to. It gets thrown in with other things that don't seem to, in my view, fit in that category so much. Because I think that if we could find those nuggets of truth or shared belief, maybe is a better way of saying that, I think there are places to come together, because there are, I mean, everything is falling apart. So they're right in having a certain distrust. And yet,
Yeah, they are.
yeah, I mean, that's, yes, I would, yeah. It's the blame piece and the otherness, I guess. There's a disconnect or a desire to not be part of the problem in a way that makes it hard to engage, because, I mean, in our country, the government is supposed to be us. So if the government's not working, I guess my question would be, what about us is not addressing whatever needs to be addressed? What are we doing that is making that government? And the vote, so the vote for me would be, it's interesting, I had no idea we're going this way. But the vote for me would be a way of trying to make action coherent with discernment. And that's part of the problem of politics, is that you don't know who those people are because they all tell you one thing and then they do something else. So there's this difficulty in knowing who that person is in front of you when they say they're going to do wonderful things for you. And it's, when I ran for office here in Spokane, I found there was, for people that I respected and wanted to work with, there was an implicit belief that I would agree with what they wanted to do because I had something I wanted to do. And I didn't want to have that kind of conversation because I think that distorts things. I wanted to talk about what it was best for the city. And that's where I thought I was coming from. And I was willing to have that conversation about what they wanted to do in terms of best for the city, but I wasn't willing to accede just because they wanted it, which I felt was a distortion. So my discernment was trying to feel out in what they were proposing, how concerned they were for the city versus an idea they had or a group they were with or other people they wanted to please or wherever that was coming from. And it was really hard to have that conversation because it was a very competitive space. And so the wanting to win piece made people look for ways to win.
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about is how, as we ply our course through life, particularly, in the midst of many of human, interactions. One of the main things that I find myself constantly discerning is honesty. How honest, or mean, what I loved about what Sarah was presenting on Wednesday was, how true to themselves is this presentation that I'm seeing right at this moment.
Yes. Yeah.
So in that sense, honest. And, I think it really gets down to honesty in a big, in a primary way.
Mm.
That, and that's authenticity as well. I mean, am I really talking to someone who's telling me something that they really believe, or are they just shooting their mouth off?
Right.
And that, becomes particularly important when around agency, you start to move in a direction. And how do you know if someone else is really has the same idea as you do? It takes a real in-depth sensing of what they are. And it can shift. I mean, you've had experiences, I'm sure, where everything sort of seems on the surface and it's, rah, rah, ray, ray, and something happens. There's just a moment of true sharing. And then suddenly it's all very clear. And so it isn't just an individual thing. It can happen within a group as well.
Yeah.
For good or ill. It's
what you're saying is making me think of a group that I'm part of that has just changed, which seems or appears at this point to become a whole different group. So I'm going to be very curious to see if that actually shakes out. I do a lot of work with the city, and this is a board that is an advisory board to a department in the city, basically. And everybody, like 2/3 of the people who work there left. And so now we've got new people coming back. And so everybody is talking about doing new things, of being more responsive instead of reactive, being proactive instead of reactive. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out over time, whether people are truly open to new things or are just wanting something different but don't really know how to get there. As long as it's within the same thing they're familiar with, they'll do it. So I'm working to, it's about affordable housing. And nothing that I have learned in the past 5 years suggests to me that given the way we normally build buildings, we're going to solve that in any time that matters to the people on the streets. The coffee fairy just came.
Oh, you're lucky. There's something there doing that for you.
It is fabulous, I have to tell you.
Wow, now that's a tanker.
It is so good. It's my first coffee of the day, so it's great.
Oh yeah, I forgot it early there.
So the work we've been doing to try and figure out how to make a housing affordable has really been focused on what they call the gap. So builders need a certain amount of money to do a project, and the government or the nonprofit that's funding that project, and this is affordable housing, so it's quasi-public in a way, will pay for about 60% of it, but there's this gap that they can't find funding for. So that's the difference between what they get and what they actually have to pay to build it. And so a lot of the work in the city has been trying to find that gap funding to allow builders to build. So that means we're doing normal stick houses. Government contracts have a lot of rules and regulations about who you can hire, how you can hire, how much you pay for them, all that. So that's another area that people look at and say, well, the government's requesting us to pay people too much. And in some cases, it seems like that, I have to say. But, you know, when government mandates things, there's not a lot of wiggle room. So things don't always fit at the local level where you are. So that's I mean, changing the government rules is a really long process. The government doesn't make rules overnight. I mean, they spend a lot of time thinking about it. They bring people together. They come up with ideas. Whether the ideas are good or not has nothing to do with it. It's just this long process. And maybe by the time the ideas are done, things have changed. Like prices have gone up dramatically in the last 2 years. So we've got all these crazy things that we're trying to balance, and we're caught in trying to balance them. But in truth, I mean, we're not going to do that within a year, within 2 years, within 3, maybe within 5, making those kinds of changes. And we've got people on the streets for 5 years. So we're not really dealing with the issue. So I'm looking at, if we want things fast and we want them also to have some longevity, not to be temporary issues. I mean, we do have temporary shelters, and we're struggling with that, frankly. They just paid $425,000 a month to rent a facility, and the people there did $90,000 worth of damage in the 2 months they were there. That's not really workable either. You can't keep doing that forever. So what do we do? What do we do? And nobody, to my mind, is looking at either modular housing where it's manufactured and you can produce a house in 9 months as opposed to 2 years. Or are they really looking at 3D printing and how viable that might be, where you're going to produce a house in hours, frankly, and you can use mud. I mean, there are things that would seem to address some of these issues, but they are so outside the box. They don't have the rules. They don't have the constraints around them built yet, you know,
Well,
so they could be enacted quickly.
You're talking about a field that I happen to know a lot about.
I know.
Modular homes take 2 weeks to build. And then it can take 3 or 4 months to actually
Put it on the lot.
site it.
Yeah.
You know, foundation, any interior details.
Right. But that's not 2 years.
No, it's not 2 years. The other thing I was going to say is, you know, a modular home can be almost complete. Well, I mean, also a 3D printed house. Also, you know, it's just a shell. I mean, you know, it still has to have everything put in place. Right. Like right. You're just you know, the machine is emitting the material, whatever material you're using, you know, to create a shell. You have to right. do all the utilities and then right. bring in all those normal finishes. By far, the most effective idea that I've seen is the small house movement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where you make a little cottage, 250 square feet, you know, for a person. It's a whole lot better than a tent. And I mean, a whole family can actually live in it. But
if there's storage.
But there's so much resistance to that. Everyone is just absolutely convinced that it's ruining land value, you know, property values. It's it's contrary to the American way. I mean, it's just wrong in every single respect. And yet, an awful lot of people I know would actually like to live in one. But
Well,
nothing's available in that type, housing type, because nobody can build it. They can't get any money for it. So there's whole systemic issues that are behind all this. I mean, it's very expensive to build what's now considered a standard middle-class home, you know, with all of the code required amenities and capabilities, you know,
right.
be able to be heated to such an extent or cooled. I mean, that's all requirement now. You know, ceiling heights, no less than 7 feet. You know, and there were reasons why those things were put in place, but at this point, you know, how do we loosen it up a bit so that, you know, so that new ideas can be used? And so that's what I get, you know, discernment for me also, you know, delves into this sort of point. You can't discern anything, the truth of anything, unless you're willing to look, unless you're willing to be present.
Yeah.
We could say here, present in the predicament, you know, whatever the problem is, to be really present in it. And then be totally willing, you know, to use the scientific method, if you will, to pick apart, you know, the different inputs and to see how they interrelate with one another and how they, you know, are antagonistic or how they actually, you know, or synergies that might be showing up. And to start but I mean, students do this. We learn this in architecture school. We come up with all these wonderful ideas, but they never go through because the general public and those we, you know, hire in a sense, but vote in to represent us, they're unwilling to do that because they're trying to protect, you know, they're trying to, you know, so I mean, when you're talking about discernment, it's totally the opposite of what's going on. From my definition of it.
I'm thinking what you're bringing up in my mind is the substitutes for discernment that we have, which are the rules and standards that we try and make, especially when we're talking governmental kind of things, in order to protect ourselves from having to discern. We create criteria for measurement, basically. You know, does the person have a PhD? How many of these have they done? All those kinds of things. And as long as you can check those boxes off, then you assume you have discerned that something is a good fit and that it's going to work. And yet, because those are created at one time and you're dealing with a real issue, there may not be really a fit between those things. And there's no way to manage that space. That's part of what the standard world has created, is an inflexibility to be responsive in a way.
Yeah, I mean, see, that's another issue that, I mean, particularly this would be true working, say, in a third world country where, you know, the whole idea of all the different amenities that we have, they may seem nice, but they just seem totally silly and, you know, just
not necessary.
Not necessary. Why are you doing that? I mean, I feel that, you know, maybe a better example rather than projecting onto someone else. I feel that way about cars. You know, all the power windows, it's like, why are we doing this? It's crazy. I do happen to agree with seatbelts. Boy, a lot of the people I knew would, I'm never wearing seatbelt. No, that's a good idea. But, you know, all the different things, in your car, the stripped down model, you know, is just, nowadays, there's no such thing as a stripped down model. The whatever they consider a stripped down model, and you know, what's being offered this year by most companies, there are a few outliers, would be considered a super deluxe, you know, standard, you know, 20 to 30 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like they put carpet on the floor of my pickup truck. Are you kidding me? Immediately had to go get mats. I mean, especially in red mud country, there's no way that's going to look like anything but crap. You know? Very short, very quickly.
Yeah, and hard to keep clean.
Yeah, I mean, even for city dwellers, but I mean, for anyone who's actually doing any kind of work out of that truck, forget about it.
Yeah.
Perfect example.
Perfect example. Yes. Discernment, being able to really see clearly what is appropriate, I guess, for and correct in a given situation. But well, then you can, of course, get into appropriate and correct. But from my perspective, and this was sort of an aha for me, actually, because I've always been confused by people's decisions on some things, that for me, the biggest correctness is what supports life, what keeps
So that,
happiness and the joy of living present. What keeps the feeling of learning and excitement and love present. And when those things aren't present, then you really need to question why. And it took me 50 years, I think, of my life before I realized that that's what I did. that sensitivity to that, when I feel like things are closing down and becoming inert, Jeremy Lent is really doing a lot of talking about how life is really anti-entropic. It does not, it eliminates entropy. That's what life does.
Jeremy Lent.
Yeah, he's got 2 books out, and I highly recommend both. The best one in my mind is Patterning Instinct. And he does a history of human thought that is fabulous. And his next one was The Web of Meaning. And that's sort of the answer to the patterning instinct. And he talks a lot about autopoiesis, how we self-make, which is what living systems do. But living systems always self-make for life. That's the whole point. That's how we keep life on the planet, is because we do that. And human beings right now, at least a good portion of us, are not self-making toward life. We're really hell-bent on death, stopping things, ending things, not doing things, not honoring each other, preventing ourselves from doing stuff in different ways, trying to control and manipulate and dampen down. And he makes the point that the reason why we're in the problems we're in is because we have, as humans, made our own life more complex by simplifying the environment we're in, which means that we basically kill those things or get rid of those things that add to the complexity. So instead of hundreds of kinds of potatoes like they have in Peru, we have like 6 or 8 because it's easier. So we're actually eliminating the complexity around us and using that energy to make our own world more complex. But it doesn't work that way. You have to have the vibrancy of life around you to keep your own vibrancy. And that's sort of what we're learning. That as we're losing the life around us, as the biodiversity disappears, as we try and simplify what nature can do, we make rivers go straight instead of allow them to perambulate and feed all of the things they feed. We just rush it through. That we're eliminating our ability to create life. We're actually making that more difficult.
Yeah, we save the trees so that we can destroy the forest.
Yes.
Destroy the
Yeah.
forest.
Or we just plant trees and assume it's a forest,
Yeah.
not understanding the complexity of a forest and the time it takes. You can't, I mean, I was in this discussion last night that the loss of millions of years of ice is gone. You don't replace millions of years of ice. Somebody said, well, it should just snow more. But it won't snow more if you've lost that ice. That's the point. You have to keep it. You have to maintain what you have. You have that longevity, that complexity that requires is inherent, and we can't simplify. So we've lost the discernment for what really supports life,
Yeah.
or we're not paying attention to it.
Well, I mean, one of the things we almost got into on Wednesday afternoon, I mean, we started to get into it a little bit, but I felt we could have gone a lot further, is the idea that people naturally it's not only societies that are doing this, simplifying everything around, all the input around them so that they can live a more comfortable and complex life. But individuals are choosing where they're going to get their information from for similar reasons.
Yes.
And that any mass information outlets have grossly simplified the output.
Yes.
And that's a real problem, because people are choosing to do that. They get comfortable in that. And
right.
It's convenient. These are words we used the other day.
Right.
So suddenly they actually don't acknowledge that there's anything else out there that even matters. I mean, I'm very concerned about that people's ability to discern, people's ability to think has just been totally, what's the word? Just cut off. And that's why, I mean, the types of guys that I was talking about at the very beginning, where I'm seeing an inner life that I just wouldn't have expected. I mean, that, I must admit, that's fairly rare. I just wanted to make the point that it is out there, even among Trump supporters. But it is pretty rare. And then, college professors, it's pretty rare, quite frankly. You found that out today. Oh, come on, let's talk about your hair. It's lovely. Well, no, we can't do that. I'm in a rush. I mean, I can't do that. It's somewhat the same thing. It's just, we used to call being, that process was being uptight. Somebody was just uptight.
Right.
Couldn't handle.
Yeah, buttoned down.
And couldn't let their hair down and let it flow.
Right.
I mean, there's some good words and terms we used to use in the 60s and 70s, but it's coming back around. But authenticity is perhaps the primary word that people are using now, and beginning to understand that there's a difference. I mean, there's a difference between authentically being yourself by, choosing a certain type of handbag, that's absolutely de rigueur, it's of the moment, and dressing I mean, that's, I guess, authentic to a certain type of look. That's not the look, authenticity that we're talking about. It's actually what's centered inside of yourself and what is emanating out of that. The agency, the agency of my eternal being. What is that? That is the question. I don't think discernment is a problem at all. I mean, I don't even think give second thought to it once that agency is being released in its fullness, because it's all you have to give. It's what you are. So, I mean, even authenticity, I think, can be, co-opted, and, the word, the concept can be cheapened because it comes to, applied to something material as opposed to what the essence is from within.
I wonder, from what you were saying, again, where my mind went when you said authenticity can be cheapened. I've sort of watched our culture go from dressing up and presenting a certain way of being to being, we're at the point where we buy jeans with holes in them, which poor people would have worn at one point in time, to claim that we're one of the group, basically, and to hide the richness that those $100 jeans really suggest. And the twistedness of that kind of forced, camaraderie, in a way, trying to be one of the people when we're actually not one of the people, and co-opting styles of dress, and the craziness in behavior, where we're going to the bottom instead of raising. We're not gaining skills, we're being more undisciplined, and seeing that as being authentic, as real. It's just, that's sort of an interesting way of looking at some of our experiences now. I mean, I wonder if that's, well, I think it is evidence of corruption is a word that comes up, but it seems bigger than that. In a way, there's some distortion of our understanding that happens, and I think it's endemic when civilizations collapse. Margaret Wheatley talks about that a lot, and it's really interesting to see how there's phases that civilizations go through, and they show up the same way at the end. They praise actors and athletes become people of substance, and they're not. They're skilled, but substance is not necessarily go along with that. So it's just so interesting that we forget what's real and try and make up what's real, in a way. I mean, it's almost a phony realness. The anger, the undisciplined expression feels real somehow, when it's really undisciplined, which is a different thing. Because it's not effective. It just makes a mess of things, which is why we chose to be civilized in the first place. Because all those wars and all that fighting really didn't get us anything. Destruction doesn't.
Yeah, sort of the epitome of all of that, what you're saying is the virtual, is the social media, all on virtual reality, and people act. They basically act. You know, everything's an act. Everything is, a put on.
yeah, presentation for, yeah, entertainment in a way. Yeah, it's
Yeah, but
got to
also
be.
trying to put one over on everyone, okay, I'm this way, but I'm really not. But I want to be
Yeah,
seen as this way.
yeah, yeah,
I don't actually have a full understanding at all of how far down that rabbit hole our society has actually gone. Sometimes I get a feeling that it's really pretty deep,
yeah, I
but
think so.
I don't know. I don't really, I'm not aware of it enough to, I don't have firsthand experience with it to really have a sense of it. It sounds so horrible. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in high school right now.
Yeah, yeah,
It
I
would
think
be,
that would be,
I'm not sure I could handle it.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's actually one of the issues that high schoolers in particular have. I taught in high school for a while, and I love high school. Kids are so passionate
Yeah.
and so idealistic, and really and clear-eyed about what they want. And I think part of the angst that we see in high school, the suicides, the uh, the difficulties, the acting out, all of that stuff that happens so often, is really the difficulty with handling the discrepancy between what they just naturally want to do and what they see happening, and being the sense that what the about the changes they're going to need to make in order to fit in with that, and how to deal with that in a way that honors who they are. And that's not really easy or even possible. Actually, you have to kind of step outside of that to honor who you are, and they're not taught that. So they just struggle with how to be inauthentic, how to do what's required, when it doesn't feel good and it doesn't feel, and how do they make sense of that? And we just don't help with that at all. We just throw them to the wolves and let them figure it out or not. And those that are really sensitive just don't find it easy
Yeah.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I totally failed at high school. And it wasn't until I started, and I think I said this in the interview, but it was hitchhiking, where I met people as they were, and they met me as I was, that it finally dawned on me that I'd been thrashing about trying to fit into a very unreal world. Luckily, I didn't do anything to myself. Like I changed, but I didn't. No, I can just understand just how hard it is for some people. I mean, a lot of people, because there are a lot of people committing suicide, or at least attempting to.
Yep. Yeah. 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 And we see, I'm back to discernment now, because we tend to blame those people or label them instead of inquiring about what's true in their behavior that really is important for us to know and deal with. That's not about them. It's about the systems that we're creating.
Well, I have another question that, I mean, I really have no way to discern the answer here, but how much time do professionals actually have? Professional teachers, doctors, I mean, all these people who are, purport to, assist you with mental, physical health, spiritual health, I mean, ministers even. How much time do they actually have to pay attention to a single person? In school, I mean, from my understanding of it, with No Child Left Behind, I mean, became so structured that how would you have any time left over?
Yeah. 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 When I was doing substitute teaching, I would come in and the teachers book would say, okay, so today is the 5th of December, you're to be doing these things, you're to do these resources in the back. I mean, I could not function in that environment. I don't teach that way.
Yeah.
It's very, very mechanical, very much in a manufacturing kind of way, that we just push things through and do this and therefore, and and kids aren't like that. They learn at different times, different rates, different ways. So you'll have some people who in the class who've got it and other people who have no clue where you are and what you're talking about. And if you just merrily roll along, you're going to leave those people way behind because they just don't respond in the same way. So the teachers who can do that are not teachers. They're comfortable feeling it's not their responsibility. They're doing what they're told. So they're being good because they're following the program. And that's their measure, not whether the students are learning or not, because that's a messier thing. So we're again, we're back to this making things simple, no messes. You don't want messes. You don't want difficulties. You don't want complicated problems. You want simple solutions and you want smooth transitions.
Yeah. So then we get back to the whole question of how can a person who is so disconnected from themselves, the truth of who they are, have any real connection to the natural world, which is nothing but its honest self.
Right.
And is actually nothing like what it looks like. It can look horrendous, hard, dangerous, beautiful, ooh and ah, just swooning over, the beauty. No, none of that's true because it's all of it.
Yeah.
The truth of it is something so totally complex and so totally different from however it's being represented in a sound bite or a picture bite.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we get to the place where we can discern, where we're clear enough, I guess, about who we are and what's real for us? And how do we help others?
Well, I've been doing a lot of writing about that.
Okay.
It's been for myself, just trying to understand some of the teachings that I've had in the past. So, I haven't been writing it for anyone else, but basically, the basic phrase that covers it is to learn to be in the present moment. What I've been writing about is, okay, what does that really mean? And how you get there. And I was very taken with Sarah. And she started talking about it, that she works with people to start to identify some of the impinging thoughts that come in, and start to identify which ones come in with certain, reactions that they're having, and to be able to say, no, that's not true. I don't need to pay any attention to that. And over years to practice that, because it's not something that happens in less than 50, I don't know how long somebody could do it, but for me, it's at least 50 years. So, but that there is that process of simply, not paying attention to those eruptions that come out within your consciousness. But that's not the end of it, because then there has to do with, well, what is true spiritual expression? Because you got to go from one to the other. Suddenly, if you have a clear mind and heart, and you're capable then of discerning. But you've got to see that movement. You've got to see where it's leading, the flow, and that becomes an expression, a pure expression of your spirit. And so it's at least a two-step process. I'm sure there's plenty that goes way beyond that. But I don't know what it is yet.
Well, I think the continuousness is really a key piece, because we do absorb things. We absorb things from the people we love, people we're impressed by, the culture as a whole. And so we always have these other voices in our heads that we have to sift through and see what actually fits with who we are. So I think there's just a continuous process that does sharpen discernment over time as you become better, more adept at knowing what really resonates with you, what lights the fire of life inside, what keeps your heart going. And I think when we don't practice that, that's when we get stuck and when it feels so overwhelming. But I love that. It's just a practice. So you just go back to that practice when you feel like you're off kilter or things aren't working or it doesn't quite feel right. Just to go back to that practice of testing against yourself how things enliven you or don't. And when you feel enlivened by that, then that makes a discernment toward life. And when you don't feel enlivened by that, then it's a place to explore why that's true and what the solution might be.
But getting started along that pathway is something else. I don't really know. I don't really know what to say to anyone until they come and ask specifically, how is that done? How do you do that? Then you can start to talk, but until there's that kind of response, I don't know if you can drag anyone, or as the Bible says, you can't lead a horse to water and make it drink, I mean, that's how I understand that phrase.
Right.
Unless you have that response, then there's no way to force it on anybody. They're happy where they are.
Yeah. Well, and that's the question. Are they happy with? I think that's a question that can be asked. Does that make you happy? Are you really thrilled with that?
Started.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you're not really happy with that, then let's explore why. What would need to change to make you really happy with that? Yeah. Good questions.
So, I mean, discernment is important. It's knowing what's true and knowing who people really are. How do we grow our skills in these areas? That's what you wrote. And I think we've been talking around it very well. But ultimately it's a personal process, and it takes very different forms with different people.
I wonder about that. Because I think there is definitely room for lots of stuff. But I also think that we sometimes use that as an excuse to not push a little harder, or to see, again, I go back to life. I mean, life is so vibrant. There's so much diversity, so many aspects of it. So there's room for all sorts of things. But there is also a discernment that says this does not belong because it does not support life. So the illusion of including everything is, for me, really an illusion. It's an aspiration that we use to prevent us from actually discerning, to make it okay to allow things that we really know aren't correct. There's sometimes a time and place to say no, and to not do, not go, not act in a certain way, because of the fact that it either supports life or it's dampening, it's making things too simplistic, it's bringing forward entropy. It's just, that was such an interesting concept from Jeremy, which I've never heard anybody else talk about. The anti-entropic aspect of life, that it's bringing forth life. I mean, life is going against that second law. When I first heard about that second law, I knew it wasn't wrong. It was wrong. There was something not right about it, because that's not what life is. Life is not about entropy. It's really about getting rid of entropy, keeping things going, not letting things die or dissipate. At least that energy, that joy. So, yeah. So I think there are standards, if you, I don't know what word to use there, but I do think there is a real truth. I don't know what language to use, but that center for me is just so strong and so powerful that I haven't found anything that doesn't work with that, anything that upsets that equilibrium, anything that is dissonant. When I'm coherent in that way, it allows for so much to be brought in instead of getting rid of things, but it feels coherent. It always feels, it can be surprising, it can be scary, but it still feels coherent. And it is an additive instead of a subtractive approach for me. It's inclusive.
Well, there's another, I mean, I'll just tell a quick little story. So I just went to see my oncologist, and not knowing whether he was, having made up my mind that I'm not doing chemo. Heck with that, that's crazy. And but it went very well. But I mean, what I began to realize thinking about it was, we've been setting this up, my wife and I, for weeks with this guy. We really liked him. So Terry took him some peanut brittle that she makes for Christmas. So that was a gift, Christmas time. And, you know, he has sort of spiky hair and wears it, usually comes in a sweatshirt, you know, to the office. And we've been generating some real friendship values together. That's what way I could put it. And so
that's great.
So when I finally started talking to him about chemo, he did say, I think you should take chemo. That's what his first words. And I started asking a lot of questions. And pretty soon he said, well, you know, you are 75. And you have all these you know, physical factors, genetic factors. And finally, you know, we worked it till we came to absolute agreement. I said, so you'll support me? Because, you know, friends have told me that's unheard of. They fire you if you don't want to do what they ask. He said, damn straight, I'll support you.
Nice.
You know, I just began to see that, I mean, to me, that was totally entropic. You know, it really allowed life to fill in any doubts, spots of unclarity, you know, and it just could, what's another word for fester? That has a bad connotation. It could just sort of generate and become something, you know, much better. Yeah. Yeah, I totally believe that. I'll remember those two concepts. Well, I'll look up Jeremy Lent as well.
Yeah, my oncologist didn't support me. And he gently tried to talk me into his way of thinking, but it was gentle. And at the same time, he did everything I asked. So that's how he supported me. So I would come in and ask for blood tests, because that's the only place you can get a blood test is in a hospital. And that's the only place they'll do it and show you the answers and all that kind of stuff. So I would come in and ask, because I was working with a naturopathic doctor with the life vessel, and she would say, well, I want this blood test. And I take it into him and he'd say, I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is. But he would do it.
That was great. Then he was supporting you, all right.
So he was supporting me, but it was so interesting. He never asked what I was doing. He never asked me to explain any of that. And yet at the end, when I was cancer-free, he was so proud of what I'd done.
Mhm. You know, I told this fellow, you know, that I said, as soon as I get home, I'm calling a herbalist, you know, because I'm going full tilt on, you know, just totally changing the chemistry, my body chemistries. And he said, great. I'll see you when you come back for whatever next steps are. No,
Nice.
I was surprised.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Yeah, that's very good.
Oh. So I guess it's time. I got notes. I'll send you some notes.
Okay. Okay, perfect. And I will put it under the video, which I will post on Friday's talks.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I've written a whole page. It'll be 7 or 8 lines, you know, with phrases. So, I mean, I think that's the best way to do this. Nobody wants to read a whole thing. Do you agree with that, or?
No, I would make it more thorough.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll just look through this and take the main, you know, and tighten it up.
Okay.
All right. Well, it's good to see you.
Thank you. It was very good to see you, and it's wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you. Same with you. So have a great weekend.
Okay.
See
All
you
right.
probably.
Talk to you soon.